Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi.
I'm Zara.
On Sunday, there appeared to be another assassination attempt on former US President Donald Trump, who is also the current Republican candidate for the US election in November. It was the second time in about 2 months that a gunman had been in shooting distance of the former president. Now, questions about how this could happen to a man who is constantly surrounded by security are intensifying. We'll explain how it unfolded in today's deep dive.
Okay, so Billi, what's absolutely crazy about this is that this is the second time in a matter of months that we have dedicated a podcast to talking about an attempted assassination of Donald Trump.
Completely wild. It's unprecedented.
Wild. Completely. And I think it raises a whole host of questions, and we're going to get to those in a second. For anyone that needs to catch up on the news from yesterday, what do we know about the assassination attempt?
So this all happened at Trump's golf course that he owns in West Palm Beach in the US state of Florida. It was on Sunday in the US. It was Monday morning in Australia. Mm-hmm. And so Trump was playing golf there. And like he always is, he was under the protection of the Secret Service. Now, they had an agent who was one hole ahead of him whilst he was playing golf. And it was that agent ahead who spotted a gun in the bushes.
Wow.
Here's what authorities said about how it started to unfold in the press conference after it happened.
He was able to spot this rifle barrel sticking out of the fence and immediately engage that individual, at which time the individual took off.
They also said that the person was only about 300 to 450 meters away from Trump, so very much within shooting distance, but they think that they were waiting for Trump to just get a bit closer. Now, we heard in that audio that we just played that they said the suspected shooter was immediately engaged. So we heard that gunshots were fired. What we know is that that was from the Secret Service. Mm-hmm. But as you hear, the person got away in a vehicle, so they weren't injured by those gunshots. When Secret Service got to where this man was in the bush, they found a few things.
In the bushes where this guy was is an AK-47 style rifle with a scope, 2 backpacks which were hung on the fence that had ceramic tile in them, and a GoPro, which he was going to take pictures of.
So I think authorities could deduce with some level of confidence what this person's intentions at least seemed to be. Now, as the person jumped into the car to escape, there was a witness who saw him and took a photo of the car, which they were then able to send out to local police. And that worked, and local police then pulled him over on a highway. Speaking straight after the incident, the FBI didn't formally identify the alleged shooter.
Yeah.
However, over the following hours, anonymous officials told news outlet AP that the suspect's name is Ryan Wesley Routh. No doubt we will hear more about him in the days to come and exactly what his intentions and motivations were. But what we do know is that Trump escaped the whole thing uninjured and is safe.
I have so much that I want to unpack there. Like the fact that the alleged shooter was able to leave and to get away and only then was pulled over is absolutely mind-blowing to me. But I know that we're going to get there in a second. So just quickly, how did Trump respond? Because he came out with such a show of strength and, he really spoke a lot about that first assassination attempt. What did we hear after this second one?
So quite quickly after, he sent out an email to his fundraising list. I'll read out part of it. He said, quote, "I wanted you to hear this first. I am safe and well. Nothing will slow me down. I will never surrender." And he added, "Unity, peace, make America great again."
I think the question I keep seeing online and certainly the thing that keeps coming up in my mind is how is it possible that people with guns keep getting within such close proximity of former President Trump? It is just absolutely mind-blowing. I know that in those same conversations, we often talk about the Secret Service. And here in Australia, we don't have a Secret Service. So can you just explain a bit about the US Secret Service?
Yeah, so the Secret Service is a law enforcement agency in the US, and their main mission is to protect the president and also the vice president, and then also those close to them. And it also includes former presidents and their families. And so those who are former presidents receive security detail for life. So that's why Donald Trump, well, that's part of the reason why he has so much security, because he is a former president. And so this extends, again, to all former presidents. You know, Barack Obama, for example, has security surrounding him 24/7.
I think that that's one of the interesting peculiarities of this election, is that we now, have both the vice president and the former president.
Yeah, so both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, because of Donald Trump's position as former president and because of Kamala Harris's position as vice president, they have a lot of security surrounding them all the time. And just to give you a bit of context, in Australia, we don't have officially Secret Service, but we have something similar called the Close Personal Protection. And they also follow the Prime Minister everywhere they go. They also scope out locations before the Prime Minister gets anywhere. Even Zara, when we've had Anthony Albanese come to the Daily Aus, his security have come to the location prior, look to see if there are any security risks, and then once they've done that, allow the Prime Minister to come through.
Yeah, so that advancing is done for any high-level advancing is done for anyone in political office.
Yes.
But from a security sense, especially, here for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and it's out of recognition that people in these positions are generally have a higher level of threat surrounding them because of their position. Now, that's in Australia. The Secret Service in the US is a lot more intense, I think, for a number of reasons. One of them being that guns are obviously legal in the US, so they have to be more careful.
So we know that both here and in the US, there is this thing that happens where a security detail scopes out and then, is at an event or wherever the leader is to protect them. We've already seen one assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life. Has his security detail increased since that attempt? Because I think that's the thing I can't get over is that it happened once, but now it's happened again. Did anything give during that time?
Yeah, so just a quick reminder, on the 13th of July, so just over 2 months ago, the former president, Donald Trump, was injured by a gunshot while he was holding a rally in Pennsylvania. Now, the gunman was shot and he was killed by the Secret Service at that time. Now, what we found out after that was that his security had actually just been increased in the weeks prior to that first assassination attempt, because US authorities had learned of an Iranian plot to kill him, which I think just really paints a picture of the level of threat surrounding this man.
Yeah.
So not only did his security increase in the weeks prior to that first assassination attempt, but then after, of course, it again increased. In the press conference yesterday, authorities touched on it, but they didn't provide too much more detail.
The threat level is high. We have increased the amount of assets that we've supported. So we live in danger times. So yes.
So few details there. One thing we do know that has changed is that he now only does outdoor campaign rallies if he is behind bulletproof glass. But saying that, he really does all of them inside now.
It's so interesting because I imagine that if you were in the Secret Service, going to a rally or having these huge public, mass demonstrations would be a really difficult thing to have to deal with. But this second attempt was almost in private. It wasn't at one of those huge events. And so I wonder how, different these two scenarios are and how that would impact what goes on behind closed doors. But if we're to go back to that first one, I know that there was quite a bit of discourse afterwards about, should the Secret Service have done more? Did they fail? Obviously, it's in the name, secret, that we might not know a whole heap. But do we know anything about if there was a failure or if it was something that couldn't be avoided?
Yeah, investigations are still ongoing, but there has been some acknowledgement of shortcomings, and there's been a direct consequence of that. So shortly after the July shooting, the director of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, resigned. And at the time, she said the Secret Service fell short of its mission, quote, to protect our nation's leaders. And she called it the agency's most significant operational failure in decades. And she took full responsibility for what happened.
Very strong words there.
Very strong. And again, she stepped aside because of it.
Yeah.
In terms of what actually went wrong, Cheadle didn't really get into the specifics of that. that. She appeared before a committee but said she might not be able to answer every question because there were so many investigations ongoing, and she didn't want to get in the way of those investigations. So whilst those investigations haven't been made public yet, just a few days ago, the Washington Post quoted anonymous sources talking about what the findings were. So according to the Post, quote, the investigation found that agents from Secret Service headquarters and the Pittsburgh field office had an alarmingly slipshod, which means careless, strategy to block a potential shooter. The Post went on to say that there were also communications breakdowns that allowed the assassination attempt to happen. Things like local police's alert of a suspicious man at the rally not being broadcast widely on Secret Service radio, and agents in the Secret Service radio room not being able to access real-time alerts. So again, a number of different shortcomings that have been identified. I'll also add again that this is just going on anonymous sources, so we will have to wait and see if the investigation is released publicly.
Yeah, and again, I think that there's a lot that will be happening behind closed doors. You know, Donald Trump is not the only person that the Secret Service has to protect, and I imagine they wouldn't want to jeopardize the safety of anyone else in, you know, if there are shortcomings or there are failings. If you were someone else who had Secret Service protection, I'm not sure how good you'd feel reading all of these things. Speaking of other people who have Secret Service detail, does Donald Trump have less security than someone like Joe Biden, who is the sitting president currently?
Yeah, this was talked about in the press conference yesterday. The fact that because Trump is not the current sitting president, he doesn't have as much security as Biden does. So even though there could be an assessment that, you know, based on what we've seen in the past 2 months, and also knowing that he probably is one of the most polarizing figures in the world, that doesn't, based on what I could understand from the press conference, mean that he gets more security detail, or even mean that he gets the same amount of security detail as the current sitting president. Here is some of what was said.
At this level that he is at right now, he's not the sitting president. If he was, we would have had this entire golf course around it. But because he's not, the security is limited to the areas that the Secret Service deems possible. So I would imagine that the next time he comes to the golf course, there'll probably be a little bit more people around the perimeter. But the Secret Service did exactly what they should have done.
So it's absolutely true that if he was the sitting president, there would have been more security surrounding him. I guess the question now is, because we know of these threats on his life, will they increase the security detail to mean that he has as much security as a current president?
Is there a push for that to happen? Like, are there people who want that to happen?
Yeah, there is a push for it to happen, but there was also a push for it to happen last time. So I think whether or not there will be more security is still a question that is up in the air. One thing to note is that this push is coming from both sides. So it's coming from Republicans and Democrats. This isn't something, you know, I think that so much of what we see in the US is that everything feels politicized and everything feels like a political attack. I think this is one of those rare cases where it doesn't feel like it's being politicized, if that makes sense. Yeah. So Joe Biden released a statement yesterday saying that he has directed his team to, quote, ensure that Secret Service has every resource, capability, and protective measure necessary to ensure the former president's continued safety. So we'll see what happens. We are less than 2 months out from the election now. It's clear they think that there is a high level of threat around Trump. I think the word unprecedented almost feels overused after the, past few years that we've had for a number of different reasons, and especially when it comes to the political landscape that we are operating in. But I really think that there's no other word to describe two apparent assassination attempts in 2 months on a political candidate leading up to the US election.
It really is. And the US right now is just fascinating. I mean, it's scary. It's full of threats, and I mean, there's so much at stake here. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We are currently running a survey to understand how we can improve our podcast. The link for that is in the show notes. It should only take you about 30 seconds. And we would really appreciate hearing from you what it is you like about what we do and what it is you think that could be better. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll be back again tomorrow.